They have greater self-reported grit and interpersonal self-management, greater executive functioning skills, more likely to take advanced track courses, and you'll notice Hart cited in a few of these pieces, fewer absences, and more likely to graduate from high school and more likely to enroll in college. Okay, so then why study ethnoracial matching at charters in particular? So for one, there's been increased scrutiny from the Biden administration on the role of charters in increasing racial segregation. So now is a very timely moment to be looking at the racial composition of charter schools in comparison to traditional public schools, especially. So what don't we know within ethnoracial matching literature? One, we don't know whether there's a difference in ethnoracial matching rates at charters versus traditional public schools, and for which groups. There's been only one other study that has looked at this using North Carolina data. And what this author finds is that in North Carolina, Black students are 50% more likely to have a Black teacher at a charter school in comparison to a traditional public school. And this is important specifically because what he also finds is that at charter schools, having a Black teacher has twice the benefits as it does academically than at traditional public schools for Black students. We also don't know what explains differences in ethnoracial matching rates between charters and traditional public schools. And then we don't know how ethnoracial matching rates has changed over time. So our research questions attempt to address some of the things that we don't know in this space. So first, are students of color more likely to have a same race teacher at charter schools or traditional public schools? Our second research question is, what school and student characteristics explain the differences we might see in ethnoracial matching between charter and traditional public schools? And specifically, is the race matching of principals an important factor? And then lastly, how have these ethnoracial matching rates changed between 2012-13, the first year of available data we have to do this, and 17-18, the most recent year when we began this study for each school sector? All right, so why might we think that school sector would affect teacher diversity and ethnoracial matching? So we might think that charter schools have greater ethnoracial matching rates for a few reasons. One, we know that charter schools have more autonomy in hiring in about half of the states in the US. And in California, up until 2019, they were able to hire without a teacher credential teachers who taught non-core school subjects. So they had more flexibility. And why might that influence teacher diversity? We know that there's a long discriminatory history of licensure requirements in the United States. And we also know that the cost of certification tests are often barriers for students to become teachers, especially students of color to become teachers. We also know that there's a greater diversity of principals at charter schools. And we know that principals of color are more likely to hire and retain teachers of color. There also might be more self-selection of teachers of color into schools where there's a school leader of color. So there's research that shows that teachers of color are more likely to feel valued, respected, and empowered in schools where there's a same race principal. And then we also know that charter schools have more autonomy in curriculum and pedagogies, which might allow principals to have more flexibility to implement culturally sustaining pedagogies. And this in particular might appeal to teachers of color in comparison to white teachers. And then we might not know if this affects charter schools having higher or lower ethnoracial matching rates, but we know that teacher turnover is greater in charter schools. So depending on who is leaving the profession and who's coming into the profession, we might see charters have more or less ethnoracial matching rates. All right, so what data do we use? We use California Department of Education, publicly available class enrollment record data for every public school in the state. So the data is organized on the classroom level. So it gives us how many students are of each ethnoracial group in a class. They tell us what the class is. And we use this and we link it to the CDE staff demographic data. So we have teachers' race, their gender, the educational attainment, years of experience, and then the course that they are assigned to teach. We also then link this so that we have principal demographics. So we know that the principal's race and ethnicity. We then link this to CDE school characteristics. So we have their school's geographic location, school type, so if it's charter, traditional public school, and the percent of free and reduced price lunch participation. And then finally, we link this to NCES data. Yeah.
Sorry, do I take questions now?
Yeah, we can take them now.
So in the direct teacher data, so well, let's say let's say in class, most students will have like 4 or whatever, in school. Will you know which class that teacher is teaching? So it'll
Yeah, can people hear the question here? I can repeat it too.
yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I think the question was, can we actually see like on the class level, not just like there were 4 algebra classes in the school, like on the class level, can we see who taught that class? And the answer is yes, yeah. Okay. Talking about the ethnoracial group names we use is an important point and topic. For the sake of time, I'm not going to go into such detail on why we landed on these different terms and groupings, but I'm happy to talk more about that if there are questions. So from this, I show what the language our paper uses and then what CDE uses. And so the groups that we have are Native, Asian, Hispanic, Black, and White. Give a moment for this. Our sample. So in our sample, we have class level data for grades K-5. I'm going to talk about in just a moment why we limit the sample to grades K-5. And we have this for the 2012-13 and the 2017-18 school years. We exclude classes that have fewer than 6 or greater than 60 students. We exclude teachers with less than 14.3% FTE. That's around 1 period a day. So any teacher who's assigned for less than 1 period a day at a school, we exclude. And then we only include cities in California that have both charter and traditional public school options. So this is 19.6% of cities in California. But these are also big cities, so it's a greater proportion of students too. So our analytic sample for 17-18 contains about 70,000 classes of students from K through 5th grade across 3,200 schools in California, which enrolls 53% of statewide students in grades K through 5. In 12-13, school year 12-13, our sample includes around 57,000 classes across 2,800 schools, which enrolls 47% of students. Yes, Justin.
Are you excluding charter schools that might be in unincorporated areas of the county?
Unincorporated areas of the county, like for COE?
Like
they're
Natomas charter, actually Natomas charter is in the city of Sacramento, but outside of the city of Sacramento, there are charter schools within the county of Sacramento, but aren't in the cities.
Yeah, so every area has a city attached to it, even if it's like an area. So even if it's like a rural area or more rural, like, I don't know, Lodi, something, it'll like, we basically removed anytime a school, like, so in Natomas, you're saying Natomas, for example? Let's say Natomas, yeah. In Natomas, if there are both charter and traditional public school options, that city would have been included.
So you're saying the city listed under like the school address?
Yes, yeah. Okay. All right, so how do we measure student-teacher ethnoracial match? So our class level data provide the number of students from each class of a given race and the race of the teacher of that class. But it does not allow us to track students across the various classes that they might have during the day. And I'll explain why this gives us potentially 2 different measures of match. So if we did have student level data, we could compute what we call a unique match rate. So this would be the sum of the student-teacher ethnoracial matches divided by the number of students of that ethnoracial group. So for instance, if there were 30 Native students with a Native teacher and there were 100 Native students in the school, it'd be 30 over 100, 30% of Native students have a same race teacher. What we compute is, so since we're not able to do that, what we compute is encounter match rate, which sums the total number of instances where students in a class had a same race teacher and divided that in total number by potential encounters with the same race teacher. Okay, so what this means, I'll give you a hypothetical situation. So for students who have one teacher across the whole day, so imagine a school in which there's two teachers, Mr. X and Mr. Y. Mr. X is Asian, and then we have two groups of students. Say we have Asian and non-Asian students. So in this situation, if there are 10 Asian students in Mr. X's class, and there are 15 Asian students overall, we have 10 divided by 15, which is 67% of Asian students, a unique match rate of 67%. Okay, but then what happens when students change classes across the course of the day? In this case, we now have 10 plus 5 Asian students who encounter an Asian teacher at some course of the day, divided by the 30 potential encounters that they could have over the course of the day. So in this case, the encounter match rate is 50%. And while we would love to potentially be able to calculate both, our data doesn't allow it, but we also think that the encounter rate also might incorporate this notion of dosage effects in this too. So it's also a valuable metric. Any questions about this, the match rate? Okay. So for a sample, this is the sample of student teachers and principals across the different ethno-racial groups in 1718. So a couple things I'll point out is that at charter schools, a greater proportion of students are, let me say this differently. There's a greater proportion of Black and white students at charter schools in comparison to traditional public schools. For teachers, there's a greater proportion of Black and Hispanic teachers at charter schools in comparison to traditional public schools. Our model. So we're interested in the relationship between match rate and charter school. So what we do here is we regress the percentage encounter rate on charter, same race, so charter, which can take a value of 1 if it's a charter school, 0 if it's a traditional public school, same race principal, the interaction of charter and same race principal. So to see if there's any additional benefits of having a same race principal at a charter school. We have our indicator for school characteristics. So this is percent of students who are FRL, enrollment, and then racial composition. So that's percent of students and faculty who are different ethno-racial groups. Yes. In this, so because we look at this, which I'll talk about in a second, for each individual ethno-racial group, it takes on the value of 1 if the student has the same race principal. Yeah. And we sequentially add regressors in each model. So for our first model, we're just going to look at percent match on charter. Then for the second model, we do percent match on charter and same race principal. Then for the third model, we do percent match on charter, same race principal, school characteristics, and then charter, same race principal, school characteristics, the interaction, and then finally with all our variables. And this allows us to get at the mechanism. So like what explains potentially the differences between charter and traditional public school match rates. And then we weight by encounters and estimate robust standard errors. All right, so what do we find? So for the first research question, are students of color more likely to have a same race teacher at a charter school or a traditional public school? We find that for Hispanic and Black students in California in grades K-5, Black and Hispanic students are more likely to have a same race teacher at a charter school in comparison to traditional public school. But this is only statistically significant for Hispanic students. So what this means is that 33% of Hispanic students at a charter school have a same race principal, or the encounter rate is 33%. At charter, the encounter rate is almost 38%. And so this difference, the charter school advantage, is 4.8 percentage points. Asian, Native, and white students are more likely to have a same race teacher at traditional public school in comparison to a charter school. But this is only statistically significant for white students. So what school and student characteristics explain the differences in ethno-racial matching between charters and traditional public schools? Okay, so I'm going to go through this in detail for Hispanic students, since this is where we saw the biggest difference between charter and traditional. And then I'll also go through it for Asian and Black students as well, and Native students. Okay. So our second finding is that same race principal is associated with a higher rate of student teacher ethnoracial matching for Hispanic students. So here we see that there's about 22 percentage points benefit of having a same race principal. So for Hispanic students who have a Hispanic principal, 22, there's a gap in 22 percentage points between Hispanic students have a same race principal and Hispanic students who do not have a same race principal. These results hold when we add controls for school characteristics and the principal charter interaction. We see for the principal charter interaction, though, that it's not distinguishably different than zero. So there's no effect, there's no additional effect of principal at a charter school. But then what we find is that when we add demographic controls for teachers and students, our estimate for both charter and principal substantially drops. So this tells us the mechanism behind why there are higher ethnoracial matching rates for Hispanic students is because of the composition of students and teachers at the school, right? So there's not necessarily additional matching that's taking place. It's really a function of the demographics of the school. That being said, one thing I do want to point out is the estimate for percent of Hispanic teachers, which is greater than 1. So what this means is that we might think in a random environment, if we had 10 percentage points more Hispanic teachers, we would have 10 percentage points more Hispanic encounter rate matching. But what we were actually saying is that for every additional 10 percentage point of Hispanic teachers, there's 10.4 percentage point additional matches. So this might tell us that there might be some sort of intentional matching taking place. Interestingly, we see a negative coefficient, a negative estimate for percent of Hispanic students. So that means as the percentage of Hispanic students increases, there's actually fewer matches that are happening. And our model doesn't tell us why that might be, but it's something that I'm curious to look into as well. Okay, so what does this look like for Asian student ethnoracial matching? So across all ethnicities, we see a high estimate for same race principal, meaning that there are more matches when students have a principal of the same race. So for Asian principal, this is 19.3%. But again, as we add controls, this number goes down close to 0. So there's no additional effect of having a same race principal beyond the additional Asian teachers that school has. And then the same for Black student teacher ethnoracial match. Here we see 20.8 percentage point advantage for having a Black principal. While this still decreases to 1.6 percentage points in model 5, when we add the controls, this still is statistically significant, having a Black principal, even when we add all the controls. Native, same findings, although the estimates are much smaller at 3.5 percentage points, likely because there's way fewer Native students and principals and teachers. Yeah. For Hispanic students, yeah.
Yeah, so the idea is, so your thinking is that charter schools have more like 5% of Hispanic teachers, and that's why the charter school that gets knocked out, which is all 5.
Yeah.
And you have any, maybe you're gonna get this, but you have like theories about why that is.
Why they have more teachers,
Yeah.
Hispanic teachers at charter schools. I think I don't know how far. Heather, feel free to jump in, but I think it could have to do. Go back. I think I like this chart, but now I realize it's so far back. So this is probably not. Lost it. There we go. Yeah, I think from having freedom, I was going to go back further, but yeah, I think there's more flexibility. I think there's a couple of things that could be happening, although our data doesn't show this. There's more autonomy in hiring, although there are fewer Hispanic, a lower proportion of Hispanic principals, so that wouldn't necessarily be the mechanism by which there would be more Hispanic teachers. Yeah, I'm not sure. Heather, do you have thoughts on that?
So, go ahead. I was gonna say, one of your earlier slides, it's first place, who's likely to go to what schools, but. You know, we had a lot of conversations about that.
Yeah,
Made it sound so straightforward.
yeah, it was so easy. Yeah, it took just one day to do, yeah. No, it was a lot of thoughts, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, that, yes.
But geographically, because if we want to change the sample schools, we're going to sample there's at least one charter and at least one public school. And we think
That's right.
like charters, maybe kind of overrepresented in areas with more higher Hispanic populations. And sort of teachers in the district, in the city, in general, or something like that. And I wonder if you had like district fixed effects that would
Yeah,
maybe so some of that and explain this in the process.
yeah,
Or what's the adult population like?
yeah, that's a great idea. When we do the robustness checks, we do loosen that restriction on cities and we do keep all cities and the trends do remain the same, but yeah, I like those ideas. I appreciate that. Okay. All right, and then finally, our final finding, looking at changes over time, is we see that the ethnoracial matching picture was similar in 2012 to 2017, where charter schools had a higher encounter rates for Black and Hispanic students, and traditional public schools had higher encounter rates for Asian students. Over this time period, ethnoracial matching increased for Hispanic students and Asian students, and decreased for Black students, and Native students held constant over this 5-year period. But the only statistically significant increases are with Hispanic students. We also don't see a difference in the rate of change between charter and traditional. So we're seeing that both of these are increasing their matches, but there's not a difference in the rate that charter schools and traditional public schools are increasing their matches, or at least a detectable difference. All right, so to summarize, in 1718, a higher proportion of Black and Hispanic students had a same race teacher at charter schools compared with traditional public schools, and the reverse is true for Asian students and Native students. Having a principal of the same race is associated with a higher incidence of student-teacher ethnoracial matching. And then when we add controls for school characteristics and demographic compositions of students and teachers, the same race principal advantage, as well as the charter advantage, substantially decreases. And finally, the overall picture is similar between charters and traditionals. The overall picture of ethnoracial matching at charters and traditional public schools was similar in 2012-13 and 2017-18, and which increased, ethnoracial matches increased over time for Hispanic students. So what are the implications of this? The first is the importance of principals in ethnoracial matching. So more attention is needed in eliminating barriers for teachers of color to become school administrators, since we know that this also has an effect on student-teacher ethnoracial matching, which we know is super important for students. Another thing that Heather and I have been talking a lot about are higher ethnoracial matching at charter schools at odds with Biden's proposed charter school policies. So if there was 100% ethnoracial matching, this would imply complete segregation, right? 100% of Black students have Black teachers, 100% of white students have white teachers, right? So we aren't arguing that this is the optimal rate. And the optimal rate just isn't clear, but it definitely sits above 0%. And I bring that up because unfortunately, many students in California do not have the option to ever have a same race teacher. In California, when we were looking at the data from 17-18, 35.5% of Black students attend a school without a single Black teacher. Thank you so much, and I welcome your feedback.